Less than 10 people own over 3/4 of the property in Hawaii. Who are they and how much do they own? I'm going to talk about that coming up next. Hey, what's going on, friends? The intro, I said that less than 10 people own over three quarters of the property in Hawaii. That's not totally true because some of them are not necessarily people, but I'm going to go through and give you an idea of who are the largest landowners in Hawaii and how much they own. So in all of Hawaii, there's about 4.1 million acres in the state of Hawaii. On the Big Island comprises 2.5 million of that 4.1. So over half of the overall landmass in the state of Hawaii is on the Big Island. And so we'll see when we go through this, a lot of these people that own large pieces of land are primarily on the Big Island because of just the nature of it all being mostly on the Big Island. So out of that 4.1 million acres, the largest landowner is the state of Hawaii. The state of Hawaii owns 1.6 million acres across the entire state, and 1 million of that is just on the Big Island. So the state of Hawaii obviously is a large landowner and owns the majority of the biggest share of land for people that are or entities that are landowners in the state of Hawaii. And then next in line, not a surprise, is the US government. The US government owns about 530,000 acres of property across the state, and 400,000 of that is just Volcanoes National Park here on the Big Island. So they're a huge landowner. And then we get into Kamehameha Schools. So Kamehameha Schools is a trust that started with Bernice Pauahi Bishop and Charles Reed Bishop, who established the trust back years ago, and it's still a large landholder. They run Kamehameha Schools, and it used to be called Bishop Estate. You kind of use those terms interchangeably, but Kamehameha Schools owns 362,000 acres throughout the state of Hawaii, and 300,000 of that is on the Big Island. And so that's where a lot of the leasehold property that you see on the Big Island comes from, is Kamehameha Schools. They lease that property to farmers and other entities. They lease their land, and that's where the leasehold ownership of property comes into play across the state. And then going to the Big Island, the next largest landowner is Parker Ranch. So if you're familiar with the Big Island and Waimea and the central part of the island, Parker Ranch owns 106,000 acres here on the Big Island. So they're the largest private landowner, outside of the trust and the governments here on the Big Island. And then going across the state, to name a few, they're not necessarily here on the Big Island, but the Robinson family owns all of Niihau and a large land holding on Kauai, and they own about 100,000 acres. Larry Ellison owns all of Lanai, pretty much all of Lanai, and he owns 89,000 acres. And then Alexander and Baldwin, which is a big private entity, they used to have sugar plantations. They own about 87,000 acres across the state. And so given just that short list of landowners, you're talking about 3/4 of all the land that's available in the entire state are owned by just those 7-8 entities. And then there's a bunch of others that own 50, 60, 70,000 acres, and the list gets longer and longer. But the thing to understand here is that, out of the 2.5 million acres on just the Big Island, 1.8 million acres are owned by just 4 landowners. And so it seems like there's a lot of property on the Big Island. You come to the Big Island, you drive around, and you see that there's huge expanses of open land, and you wonder, who owns that? Why isn't that being developed or built on? And this is the reason, is because there are, over 3 million acres are owned by about 10 different entities. And so, the other important thing to understand about land in Hawaii is that less than 2% of the land on the Big Island is zoned for any type of urban development. And so that's one of the reasons that property values are obviously high, is because although it may look like there's a lot of property, it's owned by large entities, and very little of it is actually owned by regular property owners who can build anything on it. And so if you ever wondered who are all the landowners in Hawaii, who owns the biggest pieces of property in Hawaii, there's your list. If you have any questions or you have anything that you want to talk about, you can always book a meeting. There's a link in the description below to book a meeting, or you can email me at dylan@buybigisland.com and we'll get back to you. But thanks for watching. That's your big landowner list for the state of Hawaii. Aloha.